I was suggesting that he has waited his entire life to make that address to the nation, and that was certainly a speech I felt that matched the magnitude of the moment. And it must be said that many MPs did as well. It was actually rather unusually shown inside the House of Commons chamber, Mark, in the last 30 minutes or so. We know that MPs have been paying tribute to Her Majesty the Queen all day today, but that was temporarily paused in the last 40 minutes or so that MPs could watch that address from the new monarch. And it is also believed, I think from my colleagues in the Press Association who were in the press gallery during that many MPs were quite tearful watching that speech from His Majesty the King. The tears were being wiped away as members of Parliament watched that speech. And it is a reflection, I think, of the moods, not just of the country, but also in our politics at the moment. And we got a little bit of a sense of that earlier on as well, when, of course, the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, launched today the tribute to Her Majesty the Queen in a special sitting of Parliament just after 12 noon, just after a minute's silence. And here's what the new Prime Minister had to say about the monarch that swore her in as Prime Minister only a matter of days ago.
During the darkest moments of the pandemic, she gave us hope that we would meet again. She knew this generation of Britons would be as strong as any. And as we meet today, we remember the pledge she made on her 21st birthday to dedicate her life to service. The whole House will agree. Never has a promise been so completely fulfilled.
Yeah. Now, hours after that speech in Parliament, the new Prime Minister actually travelled to Buckingham Palace for her first audience with the new King. It is a regular weekly occurrence, isn't it, between the Prime Minister and the monarch, in which they talk about the constitutional affairs of state. It is a very private meeting. We have no idea what is said between a Prime Minister and a monarch, is something that Theresa May alluded to in her speech. She said it was the only one time, Mark, that she could be guaranteed that that meeting wouldn't be leaked to the press. And it is interesting, that relationship between Prime Ministers and the monarch. And again, we got a sense of that today from the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who'd only stood down earlier on this week, who was also in the Commons to pay tribute to Her Majesty.
And as we look back at that vast arc of service, its sheer duration is almost impossible to take in. She was the last living person in British public life to have served in uniform in the Second World War. She was the first female member of the royal family in 1,000 years to serve full-time in the armed forces, and that impulse to do her duty carried her right through into her 10th decade, to the very moment in Balmoral, as my right honourable friend has said, only 3 days ago.
I have to say, I must say, I think that actually Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Horrid Harman in many regards, had pitch perfect speeches during that special sitting of Parliament today. But also rising to the occasion was the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, who also talked about his relationship with our former monarch, with Queen Elizabeth II.
For the 70 glorious years of her reign, our Queen was at the heart of this nation's life. She did not simply reign over us. She lived alongside us. She shared in our hopes and our fears, our joy and our pain, our good times and our bad.
Sir Keir Starmer speaking a little bit earlier on in Parliament. Those tributes are continuing this evening in the Palace of Westminster, and they will continue into tomorrow as well, before essentially Parliament is adjourned during the national mourning period. Interestingly, of course, the Queen will lie in state for, I think, 3 to 5 days in Westminster Hall a little later on in the week ahead as we prepare for her funeral. Just to give a sense of where the Prime Minister is right now, she is in St Paul's Cathedral at a special service of remembrance to Her Majesty the Queen. She's been joined by senior cabinet ministers, by senior politicians from across the country, including Sir Keir Starmer and the Mayor of London. That service taking place in St Paul's Cathedral. Tomorrow, again, as the Prime Minister plays a very fundamental part of our Constitution, those tributes will continue in Parliament, but she will be at the accession ceremony tomorrow morning in St James's Palace at 10 a.m, in which essentially King Charles III is rubber-stamped as monarch. Much of the Privy Council will be there as well. That will be televised for the first time, an historic moment in our nation's history. And then tomorrow afternoon, the King will meet the Cabinet and the Prime Minister in a special meeting of the new monarch meeting the new Prime Minister and the new Cabinet. We don't know whether that's going to be held yet. That's up to the Palace to decide, but that meeting will take place tomorrow afternoon.